They laughed at the cleaning lady, until she grabbed the mic and said, "Look at that. How can such a luxurious hotel let people like her work here?" Madeline sneered. Isaac stopped, his cold gaze sweeping over Mrs. Constance. "You're right, Madeline. A high-class place like this hiring an old woman like her." His voice drawled with disdain. Alexander laughed in agreement. "She probably doesn't even know what luxury means. Just look at the way she mops the floor. It's all you need to know." Constance, having heard every word, let out a quiet sigh. She bowed her head and continued her work, her face betraying no emotion. Yet in her eyes, a patient sadness glimmered, as if she was all too familiar with such remarks. From a distance, David, a young staff member arranging tablecloths, couldn't suppress his growing sense of injustice. He put down the cloth he was holding and strode toward them. "Isaac," David said firmly, his voice unwavering. "You should respect others. She's a human being too." Isaac turned, raising an eyebrow challengingly. "A human being? You're calling her a human being? She's just a tool for cleaning, that's all." His tone was full of provocation. Madeline burst out laughing. "David, you're so naive. Focus on your job before you get yourself fired." David clenched his fists, but before he could say anything, Constance's gaze caught his. Her eyes seemed to convey that he didn't need to interfere. She gently shook her head, her pale lips curving into a faint, weary smile. "Thank you, David," she said softly, her voice warm. "But it's all right. I'm used to it." Isaac turned to his friends, his mocking remarks continuing unabated. "Madeline, Alexander, let's go. This place isn't as perfect as I thought." The trio walked off, their laughter echoing in the grand, elegant space. David stood frozen, his eyes following Constance's figure. He felt a mix of anger and helplessness at the injustice she had to endure. "You don't have to put up with them like that," David said after a moment of silence, stepping closer to Constance. "You could report this to the management." Constance set down her mop, her hands trembling slightly, but her gaze was calm. "David, you're young, and maybe you don't understand yet. In life, sometimes silence is the greatest strength. I don't need to prove anything to people like them." David wanted to say more, but he couldn't find the words. Her response was a bitter yet dignified acceptance. Meanwhile, Isaac's group walked into the hotel's upscale bar. Stephen, the bartender with a friendly smile, was swiftly preparing cocktails. However, when he saw Isaac's group, his smile faded slightly, his expression briefly showing discomfort. "We need 3 martinis, the most expensive ones," Isaac ordered, not even glancing at Stephen. "And hurry up. We don't have all day." Stephen nodded, restraining his emotions, and began mixing the drinks. Madeline eyed him briefly before turning to Alexander and whispering, "This place is full of mediocre staff. I don't understand how this hotel is even famous." "Probably because they have people like Isaac to maintain the high-class image," Alexander quipped. Stephen, overhearing their words, simply shook his head silently. He placed the 3 martinis on the counter and offered a polite smile. "Here are your martinis." Isaac glanced at Stephen but offered no thanks. Instead, he said, "Next time, be quicker." The trio continued their conversation, oblivious to the irritated glances of the other staff around them. In the main lobby, David couldn't shake the words of contempt Isaac had uttered. He watched Constance as she continued her work quietly, as though nothing had happened. "David," a voice called out. It was Lucy, a colleague who worked at the front desk. She approached and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Don't let them get to you. Isaac and his group are always like that." David sighed, his gaze still fixed on Constance. "But why does everyone let them do whatever they want? Does everyone just have to endure it?" Lucy shook her head gently. "Not everyone endures, David. It's just that sometimes we have to choose our battles. Constance isn't weak. She's stronger than anyone here. David remained silent, but the feeling of injustice simmered within him. He wondered if there was any way to change this situation. In a distant corner, Constance set her mop aside, straightened her back, and adjusted the scarf on her head. She looked around, seeing everyone engrossed in their tasks. A faint smile crossed her face. Perhaps the harsh words didn't hurt her as much as people thought. Yet deep in her eyes lay untold stories. She let out a soft sigh, picked up the bucket, and resumed her work. The floor ahead was still long, and she had much to do. The next morning, soft sunlight filtered through the large glass windows of Starlight Hotel. Constance had already begun her work early, as always. She meticulously cleaned the lobby, her hands carefully wiping every polished surface. Meanwhile, footsteps echoed from the staircase leading to the main lobby. It was Isaac, accompanied by Madeline and Alexander. They descended with their usual air of arrogance, as if the entire hotel was their personal stage. "Madeline," Isaac said loudly, his voice brimming with excitement. "Tonight, we're hosting a party in the largest conference room. I want everything to be perfect. This will be a chance for us to show our class." Madeline chuckled, turning to Alexander. "Sounds great. Let's show the world who we really are." Constance looked up, her gaze briefly meeting Isaac's. She said nothing, only lowering her head to continue her work. But somehow, her glance seemed to irritate Isaac. "Hey, old lady," Isaac called out, making sure everyone nearby could hear. "I hope you can clean the floor before the guests arrive. Don't embarrass this hotel." Madeline laughed, covering her mouth as if his words were an amusing joke. Alexander added, "Even if she tries, it probably won't be clean. She's just doing a half-hearted job." Constance remained silent, her aged hands persistently scrubbing the floor. Nearby, David, arranging tables and chairs, couldn't hold back any longer. He stepped forward, his gaze unwavering as he faced Isaac. "Isaac, could you be more respectful?" David said, his voice filled with indignation. "She's working hard, and she deserves respect." Isaac smirked and clapped Alexander on the shoulder. "Listen to him. Respect? For a janitor? Don't make me laugh, David." Madeline turned to David, her tone sharp. "David, if you want to keep this job, you'd better know your place. You don't have the authority to speak up here." David clenched his fists, but before he could respond, Constance spoke up, her voice steady and calm. "David, thank you, but I'm fine." She turned to Isaac, her gaze resolute. "If you think I'm not good enough to work here, you're welcome to speak to the management." Isaac was momentarily taken aback by her response, but only for a second. He burst into laughter, his expression full of mockery. The group left, leaving a tense atmosphere behind. David turned to Constance, his voice filled with frustration. "You don't have to put up with them like that. We can report them to management." Constance gently shook her head. "David, you don't need to worry about me. People like them, their words cannot hurt me. But why don't you stand up for yourself?" David asked, his voice tinged with dissatisfaction. Constance smiled, a weary yet meaningful smile. "David, do you think arguing with them will change anything? My life isn't defined by what they think or say about me." David remained silent. Her words left him feeling both admiration for her strength and anger at the injustice she endured. By the afternoon, Constance continued her work in the grand conference hall, where Isaac's group had requested to host their evening party. She carefully cleaned every corner, arranging chairs and tables neatly as instructed by the management. Isaac walked in, followed by Madeline and Alexander. In his hand was a glass of red wine. He approached Constance, his eyes filled with mischief. "Old lady, I think there's a stain on the floor," Isaac said, his voice feigning seriousness. "You should clean it right away." Constance looked up, her expression still calm. "I'll take care of it, sir." But before she could act, Isaac deliberately tipped his wine glass, spilling the deep red liquid onto the floor. "Oops, looks like I just made a mess. Hurry up and clean it, won't you?" Madeline and Alexander burst out laughing as if Isaac's actions were the pinnacle of humor. Nearby, David, arranging flowers, could no longer contain himself. He marched over, his eyes blazing with anger. "Isaac, you've gone too far." Isaac turned to him, raising an eyebrow in challenge. "Too far? All I did was ask the janitor to do her job." "Her job isn't to endure your disrespect," David shot back, his voice echoing across the room. The room fell silent. All eyes were on the two men. Isaac laughed, but this time his laughter sounded strained. "David, I think you're forgetting your place. Don't forget, I'm a guest here." "And she's an employee here," David retorted. "If you can't respect her, you don't deserve to be in this hotel." Constance placed a hand on David's shoulder, signaling him to calm down. "Thank you, David," she said softly, her voice still gentle. "But I'll handle this myself." David stepped back, his eyes still filled with frustration. Isaac shrugged and turned back to Madeline and Alexander. "Let's go. I don't want to waste my time with these lowly people." As Isaac's group left, David looked at Constance, a sense of helplessness washing over him. "You don't have to endure them," he said again. Constance simply smiled, a faint, tired smile. "David, sometimes the best way to deal with injustice is to let it fade on its own. People like them can't hurt me unless I let them." David didn't respond, but his admiration for her only deepened. The atmosphere at Starlight Hotel seemed heavier after the morning's events. Staff members whispered among themselves about Isaac's arrogant behavior. Some, like Lucy and Stephen, were used to dealing with such guests, but they still felt anger on Constance's behalf. In a small corner of the employee break room, David found Constance sitting quietly, taking a short rest after her shift. Before her was a simple cup of hot tea. Her face showed no sign of sadness or anger, only the familiar calmness she carried. "Are you all right, Constance?" David asked, his voice full of concern. Constance looked up at him and smiled gently. "I'm fine, David. Don't let things like that bother you." David sat down beside her, sighing. "But you don't deserve to be treated that way. What gives them the right to humiliate others like that?" Constance quietly gazed into her tea, lost in thought. After a few moments of silence, she said, "David, I've been doing this job for over 30 years. Since I was young, I've encountered many people like Isaac. They think that status and money determine someone's worth. But you know what? They can't change anything inside me." David stayed silent, listening intently to her words. To him, Constance was not just a janitor. She was a symbol of patience and dignity. Meanwhile, in another part of the hotel, Isaac, Madeline, and Alexander continued to exert their sense of entitlement. They entered the hotel's restaurant, where a lunch had been prepared for them. Rose, a young waitress, approached their table with a tray of food, her nervousness evident. Isaac glanced at the dish and raised an eyebrow in displeasure. "What is this?" he asked, his tone dripping with disdain. Rose hesitated. "Sir, this is the grilled salmon with lemon butter sauce, as you requested." Isaac waved his hand dismissively, knocking the tray and its contents onto the floor. "I didn't ask for this. Who gave you the right to decide for me?" Rose froze, her eyes wide with fear. "Sir, I just followed the order from this morning." Madeline laughed, watching Isaac with amusement. "Isaac, you're so strict. But I like it." Alexander added, "Exactly. The staff here needs to understand who they're working for." Stephen, standing behind the bar, watched the scene unfold. His hands clenched into fists, but he said nothing. Rose knelt to pick up the mess, her hands trembling. Isaac stood there, arms crossed, making no move to help. On the other side of the hotel, Constance returned to her work. But this time, her thoughts were not just about the patience she needed to maintain. Memories from her past flashed through her mind. Years ago, she had been a young woman with nothing, leaving her village to seek work in the city. Her first job had been as a janitor in a small hotel. She remembered the condescending looks and mocking words she endured. But she never complained because she knew she had a child to raise and family debts to pay. "My son," Constance whispered, her eyes softening at the thought of her now-grown child living abroad. Everything she endured had been for his future. Later in the afternoon, David ran into Rose in the hallway. She was still shaking from the incident in the restaurant. "Rose, are you okay?" David asked, his voice full of worry. Rose nodded, but her eyes were red. "I'm fine. It's just. I'm not used to being treated like that." David gently placed a hand on her shoulder, as if to comfort her. "You don't deserve to go through that. Don't let them shake your confidence. They're just people who need to put others down to feel important." Rose nodded slightly, but the unease in her heart remained. That evening, as Constance was finishing her work in the conference hall, David appeared. He looked at her with a determined expression. "Constance, I want to do something to change this," David said. "You shouldn't have to keep enduring them like this." Constance put down the mop and turned to him. "David, I know you mean well. But life isn't always fair. What we can do is hold on to our values. But why don't you stand up for yourself? Don't you see how wrong they are?" David asked, his voice filled with frustration. "I do," Constance replied, her gaze gentle but resolute. "But I don't need to prove that to them. They'll realize it on their own when the time comes." David fell silent, but a sense of determination rose within him. He didn't know what he would do, but he knew he couldn't stand by and watch injustice unfold any longer. Meanwhile, Isaac and his friends entered the conference hall, where Constance had just finished cleaning. They scanned the room, inspecting every detail. "It's acceptable," Isaac remarked, his tone patronizing. "But I hope there won't be any mistakes tonight." Alexander chuckled. "If there are, we'll just call the cleaning lady. She's always ready to serve, isn't she?" The three burst into laughter, their voices echoing in the empty room. Constance quietly walked away without saying a word. But in her eyes, a quiet fire burned. The lights in Starlight Hotel's grandest conference hall began to shine brightly, reflecting the splendor of the space. The tables were covered with pristine white cloths, and crystal glasses and polished silverware sparkled. David and a few other staff members were busy completing the final preparations for Isaac's evening party. Constance stood in a corner of the room, quietly cleaning the remaining smudges on the floor. Despite being exhausted after a long day, she maintained her calm demeanor, her focus unwavering. The mocking words of Isaac's group still lingered in her mind, but she refused to let them distract her. Nearby, David watched her closely. He felt uneasy witnessing the injustice she endured. Every mocking word, every disrespectful act from Isaac and his friends felt like a knife to his sense of dignity. He wanted to do something, but he didn't know where to begin. Moments later, the sound of footsteps on the marble floor signaled the arrival of Isaac's group. He entered with Madeline and Alexander, all three dressed elegantly, exuding an air of authority. They glanced around the room as if inspecting every detail. "Isaac, not bad," Madeline remarked, pretending to raise an eyebrow in approval. "But I think we could add something extra to make it stand out." Isaac nodded, then turned to Constance, who was quietly standing nearby. "Hey, old lady, come here." Constance looked up, showing no sign of surprise. She stepped forward, her expression calm. "What do you need, sir?" Isaac raised an eyebrow, looking her up and down with a condescending gaze. "I think this place isn't quite perfect yet. Mop the floor again immediately. I don't want any stains ruining my party. David, who was arranging flowers nearby, stopped what he was doing and turned to look at Isaac, his eyes filled with anger. Isaac, what do you think you're doing? She just finished cleaning. The floor is spotless. Isaac laughed loudly and turned to Madeline and Alexander. Did you hear that? David, you don't understand perfection. I'm paying for the best service, and I want it to be perfect. Madeline chimed in, her tone dripping with sarcasm. Exactly. A high-end hotel like this shouldn't let guests leave dissatisfied. Constance stepped forward and placed a hand on David's shoulder, signaling him to stay calm. She looked at Isaac, her voice steady but firm. I'll do as you ask, sir. But the floor is already very clean. Isaac smirked. You don't need to explain. Just do your job. David couldn't hold back any longer. Isaac, you don't have the right to treat people like this. She's a human being, not a tool for you to boss around. This time, Isaac turned fully to face David, his gaze full of challenge. And you think you have the right to talk to me like that, David? You're just a lowly employee here, and if you don't want to lose your job, you'd better stay quiet. David stepped forward, but Constance shook her head. Don't, David. I'm fine. Not long after, the party began. The guests were prominent figures in the business world. The conference hall quickly filled with laughter and conversation. Isaac's group, as usual, attracted attention with their confident demeanor and boastful stories. In a quiet corner, Constance continued her work. She cleaned the empty tables, adjusted the tablecloths, and ensured everything went smoothly. David stood nearby, silently watching her. His heart felt heavy as he thought about the injustice she faced. Isaac, do you see that cleaning lady over there? Madeline said loudly, ensuring those around her could hear. It's hilarious to think she's trying to blend into this luxurious setting. The entire table laughed. Not missing the opportunity, Isaac added, Madeline, don't you see? That's how they work. They only know how to bow their heads and follow orders. Isn't that right, old lady? Constance heard every word, but she didn't respond. She continued her work, her focus unwavering. David could no longer remain silent. He stepped closer to Isaac, his voice clear and firm. Isaac, can you stop this? Don't you see you're humiliating someone? Isaac turned to him, his face full of mockery. David, you really don't know your place. I'm just speaking the truth. If you're uncomfortable, then you're just like her. Madeline laughed, and Alexander added, David, maybe you should find another job. This one seems to make you too sensitive. Their words only fueled David's anger. He clenched his fists, but once again, Constance intervened. Thank you, David. But I'm okay. Really? David turned to her, his eyes full of helplessness. Why do you let them treat you like this, Constance? They have no right. Constance looked at him, her gaze gentle but strong. David, their arrogance cannot hurt me. They're only tarnishing their own image. The party continued with laughter and Isaac's arrogant remarks. Constance, as always, completed her work without complaint. But David knew that, deep down, the words must have left a mark. As Constance quietly left the conference hall, David watched her go. In his heart, his admiration for her grew even stronger. At the same time, he felt a burning anger at the injustice and a determination to do something to change it. The atmosphere at Starlight Hotel that evening seemed more tense than ever. News of the unexpected arrival of the hotel's owner at the evening banquet quickly spread among the staff. Everyone was curious, while Isaac's group grew even more excited. They saw it as a chance to impress and build connections with the most powerful figure in the establishment. I heard the owner is a very private person, Madeline said as she stood chatting with Isaac and Alexander in a corner of the conference hall. If we can catch their attention, maybe they'll invest in our projects. Isaac nodded, his eyes gleaming with ambition. Exactly. This is a golden opportunity. Tonight, we're not just guests. We're the ones who deserve recognition. Alexander chuckled. Isaac, you'd better prepare a speech just in case they call you up on stage. Laughter erupted among them, but in the far corner of the room, David and Constance continued their work. Constance was cleaning the tables along the edges of the room, while David adjusted flower arrangements on the banquet tables. His eyes occasionally flicked toward Isaac's group, filled with indignation. Doesn't it bother you, the way they act? David asked, his voice tinged with frustration. Constance looked up at him, offering a faint smile. David, they don't bother me. They only make themselves smaller in the eyes of others. But they hurt you. I don't understand why you put up with it, David said, his gaze unwavering. Constance placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, her voice warm and steady. David, you're young, and you have compassion. That's a precious thing. But remember, sometimes the best way to deal with arrogant people is to let them see their own mistakes. You don't need to lower yourself to their level. Meanwhile, guests began arriving for the banquet, filling the room with lively chatter. Isaac and his friends quickly mingled with the crowd, engaging in conversations with anyone who appeared important. They confidently moved from table to table, their smiles practiced and polished. I think we're going to own this party, Madeline whispered to Isaac as she sipped her wine. You just need to make sure they remember your name. Isaac grinned, adjusting his tie. Trust me, they won't forget me. In another corner, Rose, the young waitress, was arranging empty plates. She still felt uneasy after the incident with Isaac earlier that day. Her eyes occasionally darted toward him, as if to make sure she wouldn't draw his attention again. David approached Rose, his voice gentle. Rose, are you okay? They haven't bothered you again, have they? Rose nodded slightly, but her voice betrayed her anxiety. I'm fine. But it's hard to work when you know they're always waiting to humiliate you. David clenched his fists but only said softly, don't let them shake your confidence. They're not worth your worry. Rose managed a weak smile before returning to her work. David watched her leave, his heart heavy with frustration and helplessness. All he could do was try to comfort those around him. A few hours later, the atmosphere in the conference hall became even more lively. Guests had settled into their seats, and Isaac's group continued trying to stand out. They intentionally spoke loudly, cracked jokes, and laughed boisterously, hoping to draw attention. But to staff members like David and Constance, they only made themselves look ridiculous. As Constance passed Isaac's table to clean up a fallen glass, he deliberately knocked another glass of wine onto the table. Old lady, you should be more careful, Isaac said, his voice full of mockery. Not everyone wants to see a stain at such an elegant party. Madeline laughed, and Alexander added, exactly. She probably needs a few lessons on how to work in a luxury hotel. Constance remained silent, bending down to clean as usual. But this time, David couldn't hold back any longer. He stepped forward, his eyes blazing with anger. Isaac, that's enough. David said loudly, drawing the attention of everyone at the table. Isaac raised an eyebrow and smirked. David, I think you're forgetting your place. No, you're the one forgetting your place, David retorted firmly. You're a guest here, not someone with the right to humiliate others. For a moment, the room fell silent. Isaac laughed, but there was a hint of unease in his laughter. And who do you think you are to talk to me like that? I'm someone who respects others, something you'll never understand, David replied, his gaze burning with intensity. Constance placed a hand on David's shoulder, signaling him to calm down. David, thank you, but I'm fine. Truly. David turned to her, the frustration evident on his face. He wanted to do something, but he didn't know where to start. His admiration for Constance grew stronger, but so did his anger at the injustice. Outside the room, the Boston sky had turned dark. The grandeur of the conference hall contrasted sharply with the heavy emotions weighing on the staff. Constance quietly left the room, holding her mop. Her small but determined figure resembled a candle flickering in a storm. The evening banquet at Starlight Hotel's conference hall officially began. Prominent guests arrived one after another, bringing with them the glamorous air of high society. The staff, including David and Rose, bustled about to ensure everything ran smoothly. From afar, Constance, still in her humble uniform, quietly observed. Though she had witnessed countless lavish parties, she maintained her composed demeanor and continued her work. At the main table, Isaac, Madeline, and Alexander kept talking and laughing loudly, trying to draw attention. Isaac, with a wine glass in hand, wore a smug smile as he noticed several people glancing their way. Madeline, Alexander, Isaac said loudly, as if wanting the whole room to hear. I think tonight is our time to shine. The hotel owner is bound to notice me. Madeline smirked, raising her glass. Of course. No one can overlook your charm and talent, Isaac. Alexander nodded, laughing in agreement. Just get on stage and give a speech. I'm sure everyone will be impressed. Standing near the banquet table, David heard every word. He clenched his fists, anger surging as he watched their smug behavior. His eyes drifted to Constance, who was cleaning in a far corner. Her small, humble figure only deepened his sorrow. Moments later, a soft chime rang, signaling the start of the formal speeches. All eyes turned toward the stage, where the event coordinator stepped up. Ladies and gentlemen, the coordinator began in a polished tone, we are delighted to welcome you to this special evening. And even more special, tonight we are honored by the presence of the owner of Starlight Hotel. The room erupted into applause. Isaac sat up straighter, a hopeful smile spreading across his face. Madeline leaned in and whispered, do you think they'll invite you on stage? Isaac grinned smugly, adjusting his tie. Let's see. But I think my chances are good. The coordinator continued, the owner of Starlight Hotel is someone who has dedicated their life to building and growing this hotel chain into a leading brand. They are not only an outstanding entrepreneur but also a person of vision, patience, and humility. The introduction piqued everyone's curiosity. Isaac furrowed his brow, leaning forward in his seat, trying to get a better view of the stage. Yet, no one appeared. I know everyone is excited, the coordinator smiled, and we will reveal this special individual soon. But for now, please enjoy the evening. Meanwhile, in a quiet corner of the room, Constance was clearing empty plates from the tables. Rose approached her, speaking softly. Mrs. Constance, aren't you tired? You've been working all day. Constance smiled as her hands continued their work. Thank you, Rose. But I'm fine. This is the kind of work I've been used to for many years. Rose bowed her head, her face showing clear admiration. I really look up to you. I don't know how you manage to stay calm in the face of their words. Constance paused, looking up at Rose. You know, Rose, staying calm isn't easy. But when you understand that your worth doesn't depend on what others say, you won't let them hurt you. Her words left Rose silent. She lowered her head, seemingly deep in thought. At the main table, Isaac continued to talk about himself. He boasted about his large projects and achievements, most of which were greatly exaggerated. What do you think, Alexander? Isaac asked, his voice dripping with arrogance. Should I suggest to the hotel owner that they invest in my project? Absolutely, Alexander replied. You're the only one here who's important enough to speak with them. Madeline laughed, raising her glass. Isaac, you truly are the shining star of this party. Their laughter rang out, but the atmosphere around them began to shift. Several guests glanced at Isaac's group with evident irritation, though the trio remained oblivious. From a distance, David sighed quietly. He wanted to say something, to stop Isaac's embarrassing behavior, but he knew this wasn't the right moment. Instead, he silently observed, waiting for something to shift the balance. As the party reached its peak, Constance quietly left the conference hall. She walked slowly through the long hallway, her gaze reflective. The walls adorned with expensive art pieces didn't capture her attention. She thought about the years gone by, the challenges she had faced. But deep inside her, a flame still burned. She knew she was more than just a cleaning lady. She knew her true worth lay in something far greater. Her small figure disappeared behind the large doors leading to the staff's resting area. But back in the conference hall, no one realized that this party was about to witness a monumental turn of events, and that she, the one they had belittled, would soon become the center of attention. The atmosphere in the conference hall grew unusually quiet as the event coordinator returned to the stage. The lighting adjusted, creating a formal and elegant ambience. The murmurs in the room died down, and all eyes turned to the stage. Curiosity and anticipation were etched on every face. "Ladies and gentlemen," the coordinator began, their deep voice resonating through the microphone, "it is my great honor to introduce the owner of Starlight Hotel, a person who has dedicated their life to building this brand into a symbol of patience, vision, and value." Polite applause rippled through the room as Isaac raised an eyebrow, leaning forward in his seat as though trying to see more clearly. Madeline leaned in and whispered, "Isaac, this is your moment. Who knows, they might invite you up to speak with them." Isaac flashed a self-satisfied smile, adjusting his tie. "I'm ready. Let's see." The coordinator continued, their eyes scanning the room before they smiled mysteriously. "Dear guests, the owner of Starlight Hotel is not only an outstanding entrepreneur but also someone who has faced the toughest challenges in life, rising above them to become a symbol of resilience and determination." The doors at the back of the hall suddenly opened. Everyone turned, their curiosity heightening as they tried to see who would enter. Whispering spread rapidly through the room. The silhouette of a woman appeared at the entrance, causing many to gasp in surprise. In the glittering light of the room, Constance stepped inside, no longer the humble cleaning lady everyone had known. She wore an elegant long blue gown, her silver hair styled into a sophisticated updo. A confident smile graced her lips, and her gaze swept across the room, as if meeting every person's eyes. The entire room fell into stunned silence. No one could utter a word, not even Isaac's group. The scornful looks and mocking words they had thrown at her seemed frozen in time. Rose, standing near David, nearly dropped the tray she was holding out of sheer shock. She's the owner." Rose stammered, her eyes wide. David said nothing. He simply stood there, his eyes fixed on Constance as she walked toward the stage. His chest tightened as he realized the truth. Constance stopped at the center of the stage, accepting the microphone from the coordinator. Applause erupted across the room, though many faces still showed disbelief. After a moment of silence, Constance began to speak, her voice strong and filled with emotion. "Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Constance Perez, owner and founder of the Starlight Hotel chain," she said, her gaze sweeping across the room. "But before I stood on this stage, I was once a cleaning lady, as many of you have seen." The room fell silent, so quiet that one could hear the sound of breathing. Staff members like Rose, Stephen, and Lucy couldn't hide their astonishment and admiration. Meanwhile, Isaac's group sat frozen in their seats, unable to utter a word. "I began my career from nothing," Constance continued, her voice deep and reflective. "I worked in small hotels, endured condescending looks and mocking words, but I never let them break me. I believe that a person's worth isn't defined by their status or wealth but by their dignity and how they treat others." David felt a lump in his throat. Every word from Constance seemed to reaffirm the values he had always admired. He looked around and saw other guests listening intently, their expressions touched. Constance's voice grew stronger as she continued. "My years as a cleaning lady taught me many things. I learned that patience and self-respect can help you overcome any challenge. And today, I want to share that lesson with everyone here. She paused, her eyes landing on Isaac's table. Her next words were like arrows aimed directly at them. In life, no one has the right to look down on another person because of their job or circumstances. Every individual deserves respect, regardless of who they are or what they do. Isaac shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his face flushed. Madeline glanced at him and whispered, "Isaac, what do you think of this?" "Shut up," Isaac snapped, his voice low but full of irritation. As Constance's speech came to a close, the room erupted in thunderous applause. The staff members, including David and Rose, clapped the hardest, their hearts swelling with respect. David felt as though he had just witnessed a moment that would forever change the way everyone in the room saw things. Constance bowed her head in thanks, her gaze pausing on David, as if sending him a silent message. David smiled, his heart brimming with an indescribable sense of pride. But for Isaac's group, the shame was impossible to hide. Alexander, who usually mocked everyone, hung his head, avoiding Constance's gaze. Madeline pretended to adjust her wine glass, too embarrassed to look up. Only Isaac managed to maintain an outwardly calm demeanor, though his clenched fists betrayed his anger. Constance descended from the stage, mingling with the guests around the room. She moved from table to table, engaging in conversation. When she approached Isaac's table, all three froze. "Mr. Isaac," Constance said gently, her gaze fixed on him. "Thank you for attending tonight's event. I hope this evening has offered you some valuable lessons." Isaac pressed his lips together, unable to respond. Madeline and Alexander simply lowered their heads, unable to meet her piercing, authoritative eyes. The atmosphere in the conference hall grew livelier as Constance moved through the room, shaking hands with guests and leaving a lasting impression on them. Among the hotel staff, including David, Rose, and Stephen, admiration for her was unmistakable. They couldn't hide the respect in their eyes as they watched her. However, at Isaac's table, silence hung heavily. The trio sat with their heads down, avoiding eye contact with each other or anyone else. For the first time that evening, they weren't laughing or boasting. Isaac gripped his wine glass tightly, struggling to maintain composure. He leaned toward Madeline, his voice low but seething with frustration. "How was I supposed to know she was the owner? This is some kind of setup." Madeline shrugged, still visibly flustered. "Isaac, this was beyond our control. You need to calm down." Alexander, now visibly worried, chimed in, "Isaac, we should apologize. If we don't, this could get even worse." Isaac smirked bitterly, his face flushed with anger. "Apologize? You think I'm going to lower myself to apologize to a cleaning lady?" Meanwhile, David made his way toward Constance. When she passed by, he stepped forward, his eyes filled with respect. "Constance. I mean, Mrs. Perez. I don't even know what to say. You're truly an extraordinary person." Constance stopped and offered a warm smile. "David, there's no need to call me that. I'm still Constance, just as I've always been." "But you hid this from everyone," David said, his voice full of emotion. "Why did you keep working as a cleaning lady? You didn't need to." Constance looked at him, her expression serene. "David, I didn't do this because I had to. I did it because I wanted to understand the lives of the people who work for me. I wanted to see their struggles, hear their stories. And most importantly, I wanted to remind myself that no matter where I stand, I started from nothing." Her words left David speechless. He felt the sincerity and humility in every word she spoke. "You truly are the person I respect most," he said quietly, his voice filled with admiration. Constance placed a hand on his shoulder, her voice warm. "Thank you, David. But remember, everyone has their own worth, no matter where they are or what they do. Always treat others with respect and kindness." Not long after, Isaac decided to approach Constance. Madeline and Alexander hesitated but eventually followed him. When they reached her, Constance was in the middle of a conversation with another guest. She turned to them, her expression calm and composed, showing no anger or resentment, only a quiet dignity. "Mrs. Perez," Isaac began, his voice strained as he tried to keep his composure. I want to apologize if I said or did anything inappropriate. I didn't know you were the owner." Constance remained silent for a few seconds, her eyes fixed on Isaac. "Mr. Isaac, I appreciate you coming here to say this. But please understand, an apology cannot simply be spoken. It must be demonstrated through actions." Madeline frowned and quickly added, "We truly didn't mean to offend anyone. It's just, we didn't know." Constance smiled, though her eyes were sharp. Not knowing is not an excuse to look down on others. Status or occupation does not determine a person's worth. I hope tonight serves as a lesson for all of us. Isaac took a step back, at a loss for words. Alexander hung his head, and Madeline clenched her hands tightly, trying to mask her embarrassment. As Constance walked away, the group stood in silence, the weight of shame hanging over them. Meanwhile, David turned to Rose, who was still stunned. "Rose, what do you think? I can't believe everything unfolded like this." Rose smiled faintly, though her eyes shone with admiration. "Constance is truly an extraordinary person. I've never met anyone like her." "Exactly," David nodded. "She didn't just teach us about patience and dignity, she showed us the true value of humility." As the evening drew to a close, Constance approached David and the staff. She looked at each of them, her eyes filled with pride. "Thank you all for your hard work tonight," she said warmly. "I know this job isn't always easy, but you've done an excellent job." David stepped forward, speaking on behalf of the group, his voice filled with emotion. "Mrs. Perez, we are so proud to work under your leadership. Your words and actions tonight have truly changed the way we see life." Constance smiled and nodded. "I only hope you all remember this, no matter what anyone says, your value never changes. Always hold on to your dignity and self-respect." Her words left everyone speechless. Rose wiped away tears, and Stephen clenched his fists, as if to contain his emotions. To each of them, Constance was not just a leader but a role model to look up to. In the distance, Isaac and his group quietly left the conference hall. Gone were the mocking laughter and boastful words, they walked away in silence, burdened by shame and disappointment. But for staff members like David, Rose, and Stephen, the evening was unforgettable, a profound lesson in respect and the value of human dignity. As the banquet at Starlight Hotel came to an end, the echoes of what had transpired lingered in the air. The guests gradually rose from their seats and departed, but instead of idle gossip or polite laughter, they exchanged contemplative glances. Constance, with her confident demeanor and composed presence, had become the centerpiece of the evening. Her words were not just a lesson for Isaac's group but a wake-up call for everyone. David, Rose, and Stephen stood beside Constance in the staff area, her earlier words still resonating in their minds. David, unable to hide his emotions, stepped closer to her. "Mrs. Perez, I have to say, tonight is something I'll never forget," he said, his voice filled with reverence. "You didn't just prove your worth, you helped us understand the true meaning of humility." Constance smiled and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Thank you, David. But tonight's lesson wasn't just for you or anyone in particular. It was for all of us. Because sometimes, we need to be reminded of the simplest things: respect and kindness." Rose, standing nearby, couldn't hold back her tears. "You're an inspiration to all of us, Mrs. Perez. I've never met anyone like you. I think I've learned so much tonight." Stephen, usually quiet, couldn't stay silent this time. "You're a true leader. Not because of your position or wealth, but because you make us feel valued." Constance looked at the three of them, her eyes full of warmth. Thank you, but I hope that you won't stop at words alone. Take what you've learned today and apply it to your work and your life. Only then will the lesson truly have meaning. In the distance, Isaac and his friends hadn't yet left the hotel. They stood outside the conference hall, trying to avoid the eyes of other guests. Isaac paced back and forth, his face scowling, clearly nursing his wounded pride. "This is a humiliation," Isaac said, his voice full of frustration. "I can't believe I was embarrassed like this in front of everyone." Madeline, trying to maintain her composure, spoke softly. "Isaac, maybe you should think about what she said. Perhaps we really were wrong." "Wrong? I wasn't wrong," Isaac snapped, his eyes flashing with anger. "She was just a cleaning lady before. Why should I apologize?" Alexander, who typically followed Isaac's lead, hesitated this time. "I think we crossed a line, Isaac. What happened tonight is a lesson for us." Isaac stopped and glared at Alexander. "If you want to listen to a cleaning lady, that's your choice. But I won't." Meanwhile, Constance approached Lucy, the front desk manager. Lucy had witnessed everything, and her respect for Constance had only grown stronger. "Mrs. Perez," Lucy said, her voice filled with sincerity. "I want to thank you for everything you've done for this hotel and for us. I don't think anyone else could inspire us as much as you have." Constance smiled, gently holding Lucy's hand. "Thank you, Lucy. But remember, every change starts with the smallest actions. If you treat those around you well, you're already making the world a better place." Lucy nodded, her eyes glistening with tears. "I'll always remember that, Mrs. Perez." Back in the staff room, Constance spent her final moments of the evening speaking with the employees before leaving. She didn't just share words of encouragement, she also listened to their thoughts and aspirations. Rose spoke of her dream to open a small bakery. Stephen shared his plans to take an advanced mixology course. David talked about his desire to become a manager one day. "You all have wonderful dreams," Constance said, her voice warm and full of encouragement. "Pursue them with all your passion and perseverance. Don't ever let anyone make you doubt yourselves." As Constance prepared to leave the hotel, she stopped at the main entrance. She looked up at the Boston night sky, where stars twinkled brightly. She smiled, a sense of satisfaction and peace washing over her. What she had done was not just about defending her own worth but also about inspiring those around her. David stood nearby, watching her as she walked away. He felt as though he had just witnessed something extraordinary. In his heart, his respect for Constance had transformed into a powerful source of motivation. "She's a lighthouse," Rose said quietly, standing next to David. "A beacon that lights the way for all of us." "Exactly," David nodded, his eyes never leaving Constance. "And I'll never forget the lesson she taught us tonight." Constance walked away, leaving behind a room filled with admiration. The banquet had come to an end, but the lessons from that evening would linger in the hearts of everyone who had been present. What she brought to the night was not just the success of a brand but also the values of respect, humility, and resilience. In this way, she was not just the owner of Starlight Hotel, she was a symbol of the very best humanity could offer. The story of Constance Perez teaches us a profound lesson about human worth. Status or occupation does not define dignity, it is the way we treat others that truly reflects our character. Humility and patience not only help us overcome challenges but also inspire those around us. Those who look down on others because of their appearance or circumstances need to reevaluate themselves. Life becomes better when we respect, cherish, and appreciate the true value of every individual.